As you may already know, my friend recently purchased a rental property in northern Michigan. It basically looks like a typical hotel room, a queen bed, a built-in vanity with a bathroom off to the side, and a small sitting area near the door. It's not a bad space at all. However, it's pretty dingy looking and in dire need of a good renovation. Now, I've already made several new pieces of furniture for it that I've shown you in previous videos, but in this one, I'll be finishing up the project, putting everything together, and showing you the new and updated room. I'm pretty excited to show you the final result. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. Well, first and foremost, I want to talk about the sponsor of this video, and that's Novo Building Products. Their headquarters are just down the road from me here in Michigan, so I got to go and tour their facility. They specialize in stair parts, moldings, doors, and custom millwork along with tons of board products. After seeing all they had available, we were able to find the perfect baseboard, shoe molding, crown molding, floating mantle, and pre-stained shiplap boards that we'll be using in this project. Novo had everything we were looking for, and they'll have exactly what you need too for your renovation. Check them out over at novobp.com. Well, on day one of the renovation, the goal was to just get everything hauled up north. This means all of the materials, but also all of the tools that we'll need all week long. It took quite a bit of planning to anticipate everything we'd need during the project, and I pretty much ended up just bringing my entire shop. Well, demo was pretty straightforward. Just rip everything out, give it a good cleaning, and then throw up a couple coats of paint on the walls. At this point, we had our blank canvas and we could start to visualize what we wanted to do. For example, on this wall, we want to build a bump out. Basically, it'll be a framed out section that sticks out from the wall. At the top, it'll have a recess where we'll stick a TV and have the mount and all the wires concealed. Below that will be a floating mantle, and underneath that will be another recess where we'll install an electric fireplace insert. Then, to skin it all, we'll use shiplap, but to modernize it a bit, I want to run the shiplap vertical. This ought to give the room a taller feel. Plus, we can miter the corners instead of having to use corner molding to hide the edges. So, to build the frame for the bump out, I basically just need to build a box. I cut a bunch of 2x6 boards, which will be the outer frame, then all the inside studs and supports are going to be just regular 2x4s. But the first thing to do is to mount a couple of these hefty 2x12s into the studs on the wall. This will carry the weight of the TV, so I wanted to make sure that this was super secure. After that, it was just a matter of cutting out all the pieces on the miter saw and dropping them in place on the floor. Once everything was looking good, we could zip it all together with some screws. Then, my friend conveniently vanished, so I had to do this part by myself. I heaved it up, and I got it situated against the wall just where I wanted it. Then, I could drive in some screws up into the ceiling joists, as well as some down into the sill plates to secure the whole thing into place. And since I'll be wiring in an outlet on the inside of the TV recess, I needed to cut a hole for it through one of the sides. Don't worry about how I'm removing a lot of material. This isn't a load-bearing support. Plus, once I skin the whole thing with plywood, it'll be very stable. Once I got it cut most of the way, I could just bash it with a hammer and pop out the center. Now, like I just mentioned, I'm going to skin this whole thing in 1/2-inch plywood. This is so that I don't have to hunt for a stud when I'm fastening on the shiplap later. I just cut out the pieces I'd need, hold them up in place, and then pop in some brads for the time being. This step was pretty easy, and we managed to get all the pieces we needed from just a single sheet of plywood. But by the time we got the last piece cut and nailed into place, the sun had set on the first day. So we grabbed a bite to eat and then called it a night. Well, the next morning, I hauled myself out of bed and got back to work. The first thing I did was drive in a bazillion screws through the plywood to secure it into the framework of the bump out. With that done, my friend and I headed up to the storage unit and loaded up all the shiplap boards that we'd need for this. And since we're going to be installing these pieces vertically, the corner boards needed to have a 45-degree miter on one of their edges. Then, to get the first board installed in the right place, I cut another 45 on the edge of some scrap and just held it up against the shiplap. Once I had the corner looking crisp with no gaps, I popped in a few nails to secure the board in place. And once we got the first board nailed in, the rest was easy. We just stuck the next one up against it, pushed it inward to close up any gaps, and popped in some nails. We worked our way across the bump out, fastening on boards until about half of the recesses were covered. At this point, I had to cut the sections of the boards that were covering the recesses so that they didn't get completely covered up. And to do that, I just used a jigsaw, and I cut along the edges of the recess opening, but I left about a 1/4 inch of the boards overhanging. Once I got all the big pieces removed, I could then go back over it with a router and a flush trim bit to remove the rest of the material so that all the boards were perfectly flush to the opening. Then we just continued nailing up more shiplap boards for the second half of the bump out, and once we covered over the other half of the recesses, I could just repeat the process and then flush trim that as well. And after that, I could fit in the end pieces while showing you a shot of my fat gut as I nail it into place. Lastly, the inside of the TV recess got covered, and then that was it for the shiplap. The whole process really went quite smoothly. Now, I know that shiplap is typically installed horizontally, but we were going for a different look. We took a risk installing it vertically, and I think it paid off. It really looks clean and modern. I like it. We mounted the TV, and then after that, we could get the fireplace insert installed. This is an electric LED fireplace heater, and it just popped right in. Super easy install. And it looks pretty sweet, too. It's got a remote and all different kinds of colors, and it heats up the room quite well, too. So at this point, we lost about 20 minutes of productivity because we just sat around playing with the fireplace. But then we got back to it, and I installed the cleat for the floating mantle. This just got pre-drilled and screwed right into the front of the bump out. Once that was fastened on, we could lift the mantle up, center it onto the cleat, and then just drive in a couple screws from the top to secure it into place. Easy as that. I think the whole thing maybe took 5 minutes to install. After that, we jumped into the truck and headed back over to the storage unit so that we could burn some calories. And we did that by loading up every box of flooring that he had purchased, hauling it back to the job site, and then unloading it and stacking it all back up just outside of the room. Whew, I almost puked. But once we caught our breath, we could start to spread out all the underlayment and get that taped up, and when that was complete, we could start bringing in the boxes of flooring and get those going. And if you've ever put down a vinyl plank floor before, you know that the first row is the most important. If you get that just right, then the rest of the room should be a breeze. So with that in mind, we took our time making sure that we got the first couple of runs absolutely perfect. This required some careful cutting and trimming with the table saw and the miter saw, but we managed to get it fitting very nicely around the bump out. I used a piece of scrap to space up a multi-tool so that I could trim off the bottom of the door trim, and then this lets the floor slide right underneath for a real nice finish to look. Well, we worked on this till about midnight, and we made some good progress, but we were both exhausted, so we put a pin in the project and we grabbed some much-needed sleep. The next day, my buddy and I attacked the floor first thing. It actually went down very smoothly. We found a system that worked well for us, and we just sort of fell into a rhythm, and we got it all completed in just a matter of a few hours. And it turned out looking fantastic. Next up was crown molding. Now, I've only done this a few times, and I wanted to try a new technique. I used some painter's tape and some CA glue to fasten down this temporary fence on the miter saw. This allowed me to secure the molding at the exact angle it will be when it's installed on the ceiling. Secondly, I made this guide. This shows me which way to tilt the blade for different cuts. If the cut I need is on the left side of the center line, then I tilt the blade to the left. See, I wanted to try this method because it eliminates having to do miter cuts, and I only had to do 45-degree bevels to the left or the right. It basically eliminates 50% of the required saw adjustments compared to the technique I've used in the past. Well, I started cutting a few pieces this way, and I was delighted to see that it was actually working. The pieces were fitting, and the joints were looking pretty tight once I got them nailed up. So as an example, for this next piece, I'll need to make an inside right cut on one end and an inside left cut on the other. Now, according to my little cheat sheet here, for an inside right cut, I need to tilt the blade to the right. I unlock and flip the blade over so that it's at a 45-degree bevel, and I make a clean cut on the first end. Then I unlock it again and flip it the other direction to make an inside left cut. At this point, we can take the piece back into the room, hold it up into position, and nail it into place. Once all the crown was installed, I could go around and fill all the nail holes with my pride, and then squirt in the last of my dignity into all the gaps and get it ready for painting. And with that done, I could move on to installing the baseboard and the shoe molding. Now this is pretty easy. There's really not much to it at all. I just use butt joints for the inside corners and 45-degree miters for all the outside corners. And when I had it all tacked in place, we could add in the quarter round along the bottom edge and then fill and caulk all of the gaps and seams. And by the time we got that completed, the sun was setting on another day and it was time for a break. Well, the next morning was installation and move-in day. We got started by first installing the kitchenette, which you saw me build in the first video in this series. Then the vanity got installed, which you saw in the next renovation video. Then I installed the bathroom cabinet, which I built for the third renovation video. Then came all the extras, like this frame that I made that goes around the mirror. All new light fixtures throughout the whole room, new bath and shower fixtures, and then we just got the whole room loaded up with everything else. Now just look at the difference. This is before, and this is after. It's so much brighter. This dark and dingy room just came alive with new furniture, lighter colors, and better lighting. The bathroom area was pretty gross and outdated, but totally transformed by the new kitchenette and the beautiful vanity and framed mirror. Just look at how dark it used to be, and that's with the lights on. But now it's lit up so much nicer, and it has such a warmer, cleaner feel to it. Now the bump out is certainly the highlight of the room. The cool LED fireplace, the flat screen TV, and that gorgeous ash mantle. When I finished this with Danish oil, the grain just popped and it really set it off. The mitered corners of the shiplap turned out super sharp and crisp, and they practically disappear. They turned out so good. It's just such a good focal point. It really adds a lot of interest and character to the room. The baseboard and the quarter round turned out looking real clean once they got painted. And all the crown molding takes this room to a completely new level of fanciness. The ash bathroom cabinet matches the ash mantle in the living room. And the vanity, the quartz countertop, and the ash frame around the mirror are such an amazing upgrade from what it was before. And because I'm a hopeless YouTube dork, I made this little scannable sign so that patrons can watch the renovation if they want to. And I put it right here on the shelf of the kitchenette, which was the first piece of furniture I made for this room, and quite possibly my favorite thing about it. Overall, I think the renovation was a success. The room looks fantastic, and now it's ready for some renters. If you're interested in checking out the property, I'll have a link to it in the video description. Thanks to Novo for sponsoring the video and for donating some of their products to this project. And thanks to you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this renovation series. Let me know in the comments what you liked most about the new room. And if you're new here and you think I've earned it, consider subscribing to the channel. I've got tons of other videos that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Well, that's going to do it for this one. Take care, and we'll see you next time.
Man. Yeah. Oh, I'm exhausted. You ready for a break? Let's take a break.
Well, I must have set the fence wrong or something.
Kratskis.
Alright. First time. Honestly, it did not take us about a half a dozen tries. We did it first time. There's something underneath there. I have to come back to a little surgery. Oh, it's a tack from the carpet. There we go.